was 16, I told my mother I hated her. And those words have, I guess, haunted me ever since. Not so much me, but it has haunted her, and she has reminded me of it. And so I guess in a way it has haunted me. But here's the reason why. If you understand my story, if you know my story, when I was 14 years old, I was gang raped. And at the time that I was going through the assault, nobody knew how to handle it. None of the adults around me knew really what to do. They had brought me to the police station. They had done what they thought they were supposed to do, right? Brought me to the police station, hospital, all of that. But here's what happened. I was scared. I was in a lot of fear. Some of the guys had my phone number and were calling and saying, well, I heard you're snitching. My whole life was exposed in an instant. My whole family, cousins, grandma, everybody found out all at once. I was embarrassed. At the time, I didn't want to talk about it. And my dad had slapped me to tell him what happened out of love and care for me and wanting to protect me, which I know sounds weird, but when you grow up in certain cultures, that's just the way they understood love. That's just the way they were raised to love, right? And so because of all of that, when I got to the police station, I was very quiet. I didn't want to talk. I didn't say much. And because the officer at the time said the age of consent was 14, that literally changed my whole trajectory. That's when I told her, I'm like, man, listen, if that's what it is, then I did it. I did everything by myself. And what she relayed to my parents was that there was nothing that they could do. And so my parents being in the space of just where do we go from here? It really just kind of transpired in a really interesting way. And I say that because they didn't understand what to do or how to help, or, you know what I'm saying? There's no parenting handbook. There's no, okay, if A happens, then do B, C, and D. And so with them trying to figure out everything on the fly, with me lying to the cop and telling them that I was involved in this myself, that I was the one who put myself in this situation, and it was part of all the stuff that I was doing. Now, don't get me wrong, there are girls at 14 who be throwing their pussy back, but that wasn't me. I was raised in church, and that wasn't something that I knew nothing about sex before that day. You know what I'm saying? We didn't have sex talks and none of that, so I was very new, very fresh, and I grew up kind of sheltered, and so none of that was what I knew or what I wanted. But I was in a situation, found myself in a situation. I now had to deal with it. And so because everything was just put out there, the embarrassment and the shame that I brought to the family was quite a lot. On our way home from the hospital, we were driving, and my mom had asked my dad, what group home they could bring me to, where could they put me, essentially, because I had just embarrassed her, and she didn't know how to handle me. And my dad, who worked at group homes, was like, no, it's okay. She gonna stay. And I remember it because I knew exactly where we were driving. I could see, even today, I could see myself in the back of the car, overhearing this conversation. And as we're driving home and just watching their interaction. And so what that did is, at that time, I told myself that I was unlovable. That not even my mom wanted me. That led me to feel abandoned. But it also led me into what I didn't understand at the time was a period of grief. I was grieving the mom I thought I knew, I thought I had. Grieving the mom who I thought loved me. And grieving my innocence at the same time, because it was taken from me. I lost my virginity being gang raped. And nobody stopped to think about that and about that kid and about what that would have done to her mental. Nobody stopped to think. Like, I was not a kid who ran away. I was not a kid who was into anything bad. I was not a kid who was into porn or watched anything. Like, I wasn't a kid who got bad grades. Like, there was no actual indication that anything was going on, that I was acting out. This was the very first time that I had done anything like this. And a lot of it was just like confusion. At first I thought the boys kind of liked me, right? Like, I was insecure and I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, we get to an age where we want to be liked by people sometimes. We want to know that we're pretty. We want to know that we're beautiful. I grew up in a town with majority white people that I went to school with. There's a handful of blacks. And so when you can't help who you love, right? And so when all the little white boys are going to school dances and they got crushes on all the other white girls, like, even my good friend at the time, my best friend at the time, she was mixed. Tall, pretty, like, I was short, like, chubby and black. Like, come on now. I was not their type. And I didn't understand that. And all it felt was like rejection all around. And I finally get to the space where, man, these guys, they like me. Like, they're asking me how I'm doing. They say I'm pretty. They want to go for a walk. They're just trying to get to know me. Like, that kind of stuff. Like, I was so naive. But I was raised that way. I wasn't raised to fight. I was raised to be nice. I was raised to be polite. I was raised to say hello when people speak to you. I wasn't raised to scowl or to say, get away from me. I wasn't raised to run and tell somebody. Like, I recently saw this thing about stranger danger and why parents should stop teaching their kids stranger danger, because most times the strangers don't look dangerous. And that is so true. The guys who were talking to me, they didn't look dangerous. They didn't look like thugs or rapists. What does that look like? They just look like regular boys, good looking. The type that you're like, oh, if he likes me, oh man, I must be pretty. And also, it was my first interaction with, like, black boys liking me. You know what I'm saying? And so that was different. That was interesting. Like, it was a change of pace from what I was used to. So here I am, now with the situation, virginity gone, crying, identity issues. And the person who I was supposed to look up to, essentially, I felt like didn't want me. Didn't teach me about sex, didn't teach me about beauty, didn't teach me about makeup, didn't teach me much about periods and stuff. Like, I know we had one or two conversations, but my first boyfriend was one who really taught me a lot more about periods, which was really interesting. And so we had a disconnect for years, 4 years. Like, my mom would wake up angry. She was angry at the situation. She was angry at what I went through, angry at the fact that I embarrassed the family, angry that I was just, like, acting out and she didn't know how to handle me. And then based on how they handled that situation, and another situation with this boy that I had, my first boyfriend, sorry, it was my second boyfriend taught me about periods. My first boyfriend, I had invited to the house, and he used to sneak over when my parents went to work, and that was a whole other thing. Like, I'm not going to act like I was a great child, but up until the moment when that happened, when that first encounter happened, I had done nothing. It was so out of character for me. And what happened afterwards is I became the child that they said that I was. I became the child that snuck around. I became the child that couldn't be trusted. Like, I became the things that they spoke afterwards, because I wasn't handled with care in the moment. I wasn't handled with a thought of, man, that's really crazy. Why would you act that way? Or, like, what caused this? Or I was handled as in, yeah, you're a bad kid. Like, I don't know why people don't ever look at what could cause someone to act out. Like, why do they always just look at the actions and not the root of what it is? This is why I love looking at the roots of things, because people aren't just inherently bad. You know what I'm saying? Like, we are born of God. We aren't born evil. There's something that happens. If you look at a lot of people, there's a catalyst. There's a moment when something has happened. Now, we do make decisions on whether we're going to feed the good or feed the evil. But something happened that caused the break. And without morals or a moral compass, you choose to do whatever you want to do. Now, in this moment, what I needed most was a mother. And I wasn't met with that. I was met with, like I said, the anger, the hurt, the blame, the trying to parent but not really knowing how to, and the shame, really. Like, ashamed of what I did, ashamed of who I was becoming. Oh, when I got pregnant at 16, that really, really put it over the top. It was like the anger just went to a whole other level. And I was just even more of a disappointment. And that was also because she faced a lot of ridicule from her friends. How did you not know she was pregnant? What's going on at your house? And because my mom is a person who loves people's opinions, or who just like took in a lot of people's opinions, all of that really hurt. I mean, in general, all of that would really hurt. And she didn't really know how to manage those emotions. And so it came out as anger. It came out as frustration. It came out as just unresolved bitterness and hatred and everything else. And I had to live with that. And living with it was really, really, really challenging. Living with that put me in a space where I was crying often, where I felt like I was losing my mind, or I just didn't understand why she didn't love me. And so when I was 18 or 16, I told her I hated her. I don't even remember the situation. I just know because she said I did it. And I know I did say that at one point, because for the longest time, that is literally how I felt towards her. And it wasn't just that one situation. It was just like the berating of my weight. That I didn't feel beautiful in my home because I didn't hear those words. If anything, I was a reflection of all of her insecurities of weight and weight issues and gaining weight. And so she's a nurse, so she would go to work and be like, man, she'd come home and she'd be like, man, we had this patient, he was so heavy to lift. Make sure you don't get that big. And you'd be like, okay. Or this one time I actually lost some weight and I put on one of my sisters, my younger sister, one of her shirts. And my mom would be like, I'm like, Mom, look, I can fit into this. And be like, yo, take it out before you stretch it. And none of this is to like bash my mom at all. These are just words that she said, right? These are the words that sometimes our parents aren't mindful of that stick with us. And so most recently we had a conversation about it. I'm like, yeah, you used to make fun of my weight a lot, or you used to say this and this and this about me. And she's like, I was just speaking out of concern. And like, I don't know if you've ever done this, or you've ever talked to your parents at a later date about how they treated you when you were younger. They literally live in a space of like denial. They're like, that's not what happened. They're like, I didn't say that. I didn't do that. And you're just like, no, I was there. Not only was I there, but those words took root. Those words hurt. Those words are the things that I remember because they stick in my mind. And so I know the things that you said. Whether you remember it or not, I remember it. And now the most important thing that I've had to learn over the years is, although those words were there, I couldn't let it rule me or run me. Like, I couldn't let it turn into seeds of bitterness. Because it really threatened to take away all the other positive things that I was building. Now, when I was 19, I moved out of the house. And I told everybody I moved out of the house because I needed to be closer to school. I wanted to raise my son by myself. And all of that was true. But one of the main reasons I moved out was because I couldn't live in the same house with my mother anymore. That I had made a vow at the time that when I left, that they would never see me again. Like, they were not going to, like, that's how hurt I was. That I moved out at 19, and I'm like, they're not going to see me. They're not going to see me. They're not going to see my kid. Because I was 16, and because I was essentially a kid myself, a lot of grown-ups around me took it upon themselves to tell me what to do. And not in like I'm coaching you, I'm showing you the ropes, I'm empowering you to be a mother. No, it was do it my way because I know more than you. I've walked this before you. I'm smarter at it than you. Like, that's the way it was coming off. And sometimes when I chose not to do it that way, then it would be like, oh, you're ungrateful, you're this, you're that. And it's like, I'm just trying to learn. But that's not how they took it. They took it in a way of disrespect. At the time, I was trying to go through, or I was going to school, I was raising my son, I was doing everything I could, and it still felt like it wasn't good enough. It still felt like it wasn't enough to get rid of, like, the anger. I remember one day just expressing myself, saying, man, it was really challenging going through school and raising a kid. And my mom's response was like, well, you did it to yourself. You caused this upon you. And as true as that might have been, that wasn't helpful. Like, it just wasn't helpful. It wasn't the right time, wasn't the right place. Like, I was truly, genuinely expressing how I felt, and it was met with anger. And so, yeah, at 19, I moved out, vowing to myself that they would never see me again. And about 3 months had passed since they had moved me into my space, and my aunt had called me, and she's like, oh, your mom's saying like she can't reach you, or like she hasn't seen you, and so I had to come up with a compromise. I had to realize that although I had my issues with my parents that I was working out, my son and his grandparents, they didn't do nothing to him. And I didn't want to ruin that relationship based on my own selfish reasons. And so I'm like, okay, fine. We came to an agreement, and we decided that, okay, you're going to see him in this way. You can see him every other weekend. And we started to come to a space of, how can we move forward? How can we not let the words of the past just hold us down? Like, how can we be in a better space? And that was good for a while. That was really, really dope for a while for me, because it really helped me to see them in a different light. Like, I understood their perspective. That's the thing. Throughout this whole thing, I understood why they were mad. I understood why they felt the way that they felt. I understood my actions and what I did. But what I needed was encouragement. What I needed was empowerment. What I needed was the words that would pull me through. And instead, I felt a lot of, my brain was filled up with so many of the other words that they said. My brain was filled up with so many of the pain that I was holding on to from being abandoned, from being rejected, from feeling like I wasn't wanted, from feeling like I had to raise myself in certain circumstances. Like, yes, they provided for me physically, made sure I had a roof over my head, food to eat, my son was good, like all of that they provided. But I think somewhere along the way, parents kind of lose the understanding that it takes more than the physical to allow a child to feel wanted and loved. Like, it takes the emotional as well. Like, I couldn't even tell you how many times my parents or my mom has said, like, I love you. I couldn't tell you that. It's not something that I heard often, or got hugs, or like, you know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of my teenage years, it just feels like it was just filled with me being the biggest disappointment and them just trying to figure out how to tolerate me. And that may not be true, but that's how it felt at the time, right? Like, when I gave birth at 16, and I know I'm kind of jumping in different ages, but I'm just giving different examples of, like, the words that people use. There's a lot of people who have mother wounds. I didn't even know that that's what it was called, but there's a lot of people who have mother wounds of certain things that people have said. And I'm like, I want this conversation to be like understanding that those things weren't okay. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not justifying things that were said. I'm identifying them. So then I'm going to end up doing a part 2. But when I do the next conversation, we talk about how to move through it. We talk about the fact that it did not kill me. And I actually learned how to heal to that the point that my mother and I are in a whole different space now, right? And so let me say the example of 16. When I was 16 and I was giving birth to my son, I had wanted an epidural. I was like, let me get an epidural. But at the time, the way things were working, there wasn't enough time. Like, it wasn't far enough for me to give it. And just, I don't know, it just didn't work out for whatever reason. But as I was asking for the epidural, one of the things my mom said was just like, she didn't want me to get an epidural because she wanted me to feel the pain of birth so that I never do it again. And I was just like, sometimes you wonder, you're like, how could you be so cruel? Like, how do these words formulate in your mind that you speak it out? Words are powerful. And so the words of my mother shaped who I am today. They defined a lot of the pain that I went through, a lot of the fights that I had, and a lot of the reasons why I wanted to be a better mother and why I show up in a different way today than I used to. But there is so much healing from mother wounds, and listen to part 2 because we're going to get into it. Hey, thank you so much for listening to the Lips and Language podcast. My name is Cola. I am so excited that you are here. If anything I said today resonated, then get in touch with me. I have an amazing mentorship program. It is for those who feel misunderstood, overwhelmed, going through grief. It is truly an amazing time. If you want more info, hit my website, lipsandlanguage.com. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can hit it up on the website or DM me. I have a free gift for you, and I would love to be in contact with you. Whatever you decide, just know that healing, it looks good on you. And I'm so excited that we get to do this journey together. Have a blessed day. And if nobody told you, I will. I love you. Enjoy your day, and we'll talk soon. Peace.